Hi everybody and welcome back to Nick Talks. This week's amazing guest is a personal friend of mine. I met him probably nearly 2 years ago. It would have been about January last year. I was standing for Mayor of Greater Manchester for Reform UK and they assigned me somebody to help me because I had no idea what I was doing, running a campaign and trying to get elected. And they sent a gentleman to me called John Kelly, and he was very knowledgeable, very friendly, very helpful. And the first meeting I had with him was on Zoom. And the background was this expensive beach location. And I thought, they've sent me a multi-millionaire. He's going to fund my campaign and everything. It turns out he was sat in Stockport and it was just some IT screen at the back of him, a green screen, which made me laugh. So with no further ado, welcome John Kelly to the show.
Thanks, Nick.
So I take it you're not a millionaire?
No, I'm not a millionaire. Nowhere near, in fact. Absolutely not. I should be. The amount of work I've done the work. I just haven't had the rewards.
Oh, well, that's the failing of the capitalist system, doing the work and not getting paid properly for it. Yeah. So let's not turn into socialists over this 1 hour discussion. You was a great help to me during my election when I was standing for mayor, because obviously I didn't know what I was doing. You was a font of knowledge. You've been in this game for a long time. You've worked for and helped many different parties along the way. Could you tell us a little bit about your personal journey into politics and how you got to where you are today?
Well, I've always been interested in politics ever since I was sort of in secondary school, from being sort of 12, 13. Obviously, when I was 12 or 13, I was an extreme left-wing communist. Had I been handed power over Great Britain at that age, I would have immediately gone and handed it to Brezhnev, and we would have been under the USSR. But obviously, as you get a little bit older and you start having to do a bit of work and paying a bit of tax and contributing to society, my views changed somewhat. But I voted Labour up until I was about 30. So I then began to sort of see the writing on the wall as far as the climate agenda was concerned. In that, I'm very much interested in the climate and in the environment particularly. And right now we are in the middle of an environmental crisis, which is about putting plastics into our oceans, poisoning ourselves, getting rid of species, and cutting down rainforest. I'm not convinced about the woes that are caused by a 0.1% increase in carbon dioxide. And the only party that had an alternative view on that and wasn't just following received thinking was UKIP. So I joined them, and I wasn't active for quite a while. I just joined them. I'd been active helping out the Labour Party a little bit, just doing a bit of leafleting, nothing really special. I was just a young guy that was fit enough to walk about. Eventually I started going to UKIP meetings, and very quickly I became the election secretary. They created a role for me because in Stockport we'd never managed to put up a full slate of candidates. That year that I did that job, we put all 21 up, so we filled every seat. And then they elected me as branch chairman, and then I went on to eventually end up being the Northwest Controller, which is an unelected position. It's a position appointed by the party chairman. And then obviously everything went pear-shaped with UKIP because it was a party set up to leave the EU. And as soon as we'd had the referendum, and Nigel Farage, who is he did a great job. I mean, it was a fantastic success for him. He left the party, and then it fell into decline because there was always an annoying undercurrent of people who were racist, homophobic, every kind of terrible attribute that you could throw at them. There was always a few of them around, but unfortunately, once Nigel left, most of the nice people left with him, and including me, and they ended up in a situation where they are now, which is just a cockroach crawling around on the floor, appealing to about 0.1% of the vote. And so obviously then the Brexit Party came along, and because I'd worked with Paul Oakden for many years, and I'm very, very loyal to Paul. He's one of the most astute and intelligent people in politics. He doesn't believe he is, but he is.
And who is Paul, for people
Paul
who
is
don't know?
he's the chief executive of Reform UK, and he was one of the senior management team that worked for Nigel in the Brexit Party. But obviously, Nigel's never been interested in local politics, not really. Whereas Paul and Richard and David and all the people that run Reform are more than happy to stand in local elections, and we've got a great bunch of troops that stand for us. And so I'm involved again. I mean, obviously, I was made redundant from the Brexit Party at Christmas 2019. That sort of coincided with my father becoming bedbound, so I left my home to go and live at his house and look after him until he died, sadly, just over a year ago in August of 2021. But once he died, I then became employed again by Reform Party, and I am now head of structure, or the national organizer, which is my title. And I also run all the training for candidates. So it's heavy. I've got a 50-hour week, pretty much every week. I'm always away now, and it's getting very exciting because of the way things are with the current state of affairs and people being politically homeless.
No, exactly. Let me take you back to something you said at the very beginning. You said you joined UKIP because of their green agenda, their green policies. Was that the only reason, or was you a Brexiteer at that time as well?
Well, I became a Brexiteer before I joined UKIP. I was actually, certainly in my 20s, I was a big fan of Europe. I was, banging the European drum. And I mean, one of the things the European Union did, which is a positive thing, is that my mother worked for a horrible Conservative council, and she worked 35 hours a week, which they deemed to be part-time, and so therefore refused to allow her to join the pension scheme. And of course, the European Union changed the regulations and said, no, you've got to allow her to join your pension scheme. And when she retired on health grounds, she got a little bit of an enhancement, because they'd worked her too hard, and they were guilty. They felt guilty about it. But she wouldn't have got that. Her life would have been quite different had it not been for the EU. So, at the time, I was a big fan. But obviously, then when you get the realization that,
Was the one thing that changed your mind? Because I've always been a Brexiteer ever since I was, as long as I can remember. I remember being at sixth form college, so I was 16, 17. I remember then having a proper debate in college, in the hall, about the EU, and I was anti-EU then. And so for me, it wasn't a single incident. For me, it just always felt wrong. I always felt we were being ruled over by a foreign country, by a foreign empire. That's how I always felt.
yeah, I mean, you've worked in the public sector, Nick. I mean, I worked in training and development for most of my career. I started off working for the Education Authority. I went into private industry, and I finished my career working for a charity. And recently, I've actually been doing some consultancy work with another private company who are setting up a training centre, or have set up a training centre. It's very, very good. The thing about it is that training is something that was funded by the EU. I mean, in actual fact, it was 1% of our VAT revenue that was returned to us. but they directed on how it must be spent, which is why we ended up with the Curriculum and Skills Authority and the big institutes like City and Guilds and the Institute of the Motor Industry being sidelined for these training delivery lead bodies. And all.
Was it this experience in training that turned you against the EU? Or yes, it was that. So that
over
was
a period of time. I mean, when NVQs came out, which were the emperor's new clothes. I mean, when there was a shortage of box files in the country because they had these people going around to every training centre, whether it's college or what it was, called DACAs. Can't remember what the acronym stood for, but we immediately made it "Don't Ask, Can't Answer." And they suggested that we all buy 26 box files and put A to Z on them. And then as the NVQs are developed and come in, we'll be able to have them in these files. So, of course, we all did that because our funding depended on it. But there was a shortage of box files. You couldn't buy them. You know, I mean, the whole training game was absolutely insane. I mean, you know, one of the other things they did was they produced these grey plastic pizza boxes called the National Record of Vocational Achievements, NROVA. And you were supposed to get one for your life, and you were supposed to hook up to your local employer with your little grey folder under your arm going, here are all my MBQ certificates. There were people who ended up with 20 of these in their living room because they'd been on 20 training courses and you had to give them a new NROVA. Because if you said, have you got one? They went, no, because they were great for putting pizzas in. And they ended up in landfill, all of them. And you would have thought the civil service would have thought, well, no, we won't do that again. No. NRA was the next one came out. That was red. National Record of Achievement, again, for exactly the same thing. They've got this idea that we're all going to be the same. And training is not really about that.
No, training should be about the individual because every individual is different on a different journey, different skill set, different knowledge, wants different things, has different abilities. It can't be once. That's what's wrong with our education system in the UK. It's one size fits all.
Absolutely. And the important thing is that, I mean, if you're teaching welding, for example, to a group of young people, some will be quicker than others to pick it up. And so the skill of an instructor is actually to run a group of 6, 8, 10, whatever, and keep them all going at a pace that is keeping them interested. You remember doing metalwork at school and the teacher, oh no, you have to stop now because you have to wait for everybody else to catch it. I mean, but Ofsted are actually going into training centres saying no, we want to see a lesson plan. It's got to be start here and finish there. That's not how training works. And when you ask them what the difference between training and education is, they don't know.
No, yeah. I mean, we need to relook at this as a country. It's one of the reasons why we're falling behind. One of the reasons why we've got low productivity is our education, our training isn't fit for purpose.
I honestly think they don't want the productivity now. I mean, I've having gone through this process of applying for funding for apprenticeship training. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I've been in engineering training most of my working life. The example that we applied for is probably the finest welding training centre in the world. The chief instructor is probably one of the best welders in the world. And they turned it down because of prevent, protect, and diversity. They weren't interested in whether we could teach people to weld or not. They were interested in whether we were doing our best to recruit people from minorities off the streets.
If you work for government, and I'd like to say I worked nearly a decade for local government, it's all the same. And what they do and all they want is to follow procedure. I remember getting promoted and starting a new job in the council. And my first day had a 5-minute induction with my new boss, who already knew me, he'd known me several years. So it's not like we had to get to know each other. Went in his office in the town hall, sat down and went, all right, Nick, great to have you on board. We wanted you. Your job is to do whatever you want. Don't cause me any work. And he opened the door, and that was my induction into his team. It's all about following procedure. It doesn't matter if it works or not. Another example I can give you, I remember analysing this project we've been running at the council for several years. I'd not really had anything to do with running of the project. Someone asked me to have a look at it. Was it working? Was it worth the money? So I analysed it and came back with a report that said it looks fantastic. Everybody thinks they love it, but it achieves nothing. And these are the reasons why it achieves nothing. I gave it to my boss, who gave it to his boss, and he was extremely unhappy with me. I got called in the office, he gave me the report back, and he says, put that in a bin, don't share it with anybody else. In this team, that's the project we run. I don't care if it works or not. That's what we do in this team. Because nobody wants waves, nobody wants extra work, nobody wants to put their head above the parapet to achieve more, to achieve better. Because in the council, it's not rewarded. You're seen as a troublemaker, a trouble causer. And that's why it runs the way it runs. And I would imagine national government's the same.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I mean, I worked briefly for the civil service when I worked for a training and enterprise council that bought the business that I ran. I was the employed director, and they then became a private company. But essentially, a couple of million quid of government money was annexed off, which was then they ran it as a charity, but they converted it from a charity to a for-profit company eventually, and the directors left with nice big payoffs.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was all over the Guardian at the time. I mean, it was, but it should never have been allowed to happen.
Let's end this section with a simple question, because you've talked about UKIP, Brexit Party, and now Reform UK. So let me hit you with a simple question. Are you still happy we've left the EU?
Yes.
It's not perfect. I think we all can agree with that. But I'm happy that we've left with the deal we've got now, which is substandard, which I don't really like, but I would rather have this deal than still be in the EU. Do you concur?
Absolutely. I mean, the big problem with the EU is that for every pound we put in, we got 38p back. And with that 38p, it was ring fenced to be spent on closing down our farms and moving our manufacturing to Eastern Europe. Now, as our national debt increases, I mean, obviously the biggest national debt to GDP ratio is Japan, and has been for many years. But Japan is still a very substantial manufacturer. I think it's the second or third biggest manufacturer in the world. And as a consequence of that, it can sustain that debt.
Yeah. And when we say manufacture in Japan, we don't mean rubbish, cheap manufacturing. We mean Sony, we mean cars, we mean high tech. That's what they're manufacturing, not little trinkets.
We do too. I mean, if you look at the lights on cars, front and rear lights on cars, they're all made in South Wales, for Mercedes, for BMW, for everywhere. It's a little node of expertise. And we've got them. And I mean, unfortunately, our media decry our manufacturers and say, oh, we're not manufacturers. If we weren't manufacturers, we'd be bankrupt, particularly at this level of debt. I mean, we can sustain the debt, but we need to stop people like Ofsted coming telling me I shouldn't be running a training school that is providing for a massive skill shortage. I mean, the lads from the company that I was working for, once they've done an apprentice there, they can go anywhere in the world, and all they've got to do is say, I worked for, I won't say the name of the company, and they're in, they've got a job because they know they can do it. And the civil service have gone, oh, no, you're not woke enough.
And I think part of it now might be the woke side of it, but I think all this started was the elite looking down upon people who didn't go to university. Oh, you're in manufacturing. Oh, you did a trade. Oh, you did. I've got a first class degree from Oxford in classics. And I think a lot of it is looking down upon people who didn't go to university. And that's why we're in the situation we're in now. And you can see it through the Brexit vote, how people were called names, how we're always looking down on the working class, why we don't have enough apprenticeships, because it's always seen as it's not good enough. You should go to university. and going to university now is a scam, and we all know that. But let's not, let's not get into that any further. 'Cause I've got another question for you. For someone who's been in politics and around politics and heavily involved in political parties for many decades, what's your take on the current situation of the Tory party in the leadership and the way we're swapping prime ministers every couple of weeks?
Right. Well, first of all, I would say that the people involved in this don't believe in democracy. I'm sure there are lots of influences from Whitehall saying, the most important thing is stability. But the fundamental issue with this country is that we have four political parties that are prominent. We have Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, and Green. And all four of them believe that they are elected to tell us what to do. And the unique selling point for reform and the reason why I'm there, and I'll be honest with you, Nick, if this wasn't the case, I wouldn't be there, is that the state is our servant, not our master. And that's what the Reform Party believe. We want to be elected to.
So let me jump in there. So let's go back to the Tory party and the Prime Minister. What's happening there? Why are they in such disarray? Why are we swapping Prime Ministers every couple of weeks? Why was Liz Truss so unpopular? It felt like a coup.
It was a coup. I mean, Liz Truss, she was facing the same situation, really, that Jeremy Corbyn faced, in that she was elected by the membership of the party. And that's because her little mini manifesto was basically saying we are going to go for growth. Now, her budget was a disaster. Whoever advised her on that was a fool. I mean, all she needed to do, one simple move, which would have been to have shoved the basic tax threshold from £12,000 to £20,000 and take vast numbers of people out of the tax system altogether and put lots of money in the ordinary people's pocket. It would have put the same amount of money in the wealthy person's pocket. People paying the higher rate of tax, they would have been better off if the tax allowance went up. Everyone would, but it would have benefited the very poorest people in our society most. Had she done that, she might have survived. But she went along with this ludicrous tax reduction for the very wealthiest, which everybody sees as being completely unfair. I mean, I'm still a bit of a socialist, and I see it as unfair. And certainly almost everybody that I know within Reform sees it as unfair. Now, if she'd done something a bit different, then she may have been able to say to the detractors, who are essentially globalists and want to take too much notice of world influencers. I mean, okay, so we've been set targets for things like emissions, but it's up to us how we manage to achieve them. We don't have to follow the crowd. And I mean, Liz Truss, if she'd had a backbone, would have turned around and done what Jeremy Corbyn did and said, okay, we'll go back to the membership again. And if they back me, then that's what you're having, whether you like it or not. And all those of you who are making a noise are sacked. That's what Corbyn did. I mean, there was a call after the Labour Party returned him again.
Yeah, I'm not sure what went on. I'm really, really not sure what went on. I think she may have tried to do too much all on the first week to announce what she announced. But it felt like and smelt like a coup to me.
Oh, it was. It was.
Absolutely. So what do you think of Rishi Sunak? Do you think he's going to be the leader we need? Or do you think, as I hope he proves me wrong, by the way, because I am rooting for him, because we'd be foolish not to be rooting for our Prime Minister. But I think deep down inside, we're just going to get more of the same. And when I say more of the same, I mean managed decline of the country.
I think, unfortunately, Nick, managed decline of the country has been the civil services agenda since before Margaret Thatcher. I mean, I think when they went to Margaret Thatcher with their little folder and shaking hands, saying, well, we're just going to manage it down until the economy's gone. I mean, she threw them out and she chucked their plan in the bin. And it takes a brave person to do that. To go up against these permanent secretaries who have years of experience. It takes somebody as arrogant as me to say, no, I'm sorry, you're on gardening leave as of tomorrow. I don't want to see you back in Whitehall, because we've got to, because let's face it, even now with 4.8 trillion pounds of debt, we can make things and get out of this mess. I mean, we're not in as big a mess as we were after World War II. It isn't that bad. It is bad, but it's bad because we've shut down the economy for 2 years. I mean, anybody, the Guardian is amusingly blaming Brexit for everything. But I mean, the reality is that all of our economy has been closed down for 2 years. Of course.
If it was Brexit related, it would not be affecting the rest of the global world.
No.
How's Brexit affected India and Sri Lanka, where the people rose up and got rid of the president? Why is it affecting America? It's got nothing to do with Brexit. That's just the excuse they want to use to bash Brexiteers again.
I mean, the BBC reported the other day that there were thousands of protesters wanting to rejoin the EU. I looked at the picture. There was about 70 people there. I mean, I know what thousands looks like because I've been stood in Trafalgar Square on the 31st of January, with the celebrating the leaving the EU, and that was thousands. I mean, potentially.
Do you think now it seems like we have a globalist again as a prime minister? Do you think Brexit is under threat?
I think. I mean, I was listening to my friend and yours, Claire Fox, Baroness Fox, in the Lords the other day, and she was talking about Brexit, and some simpering, I assume, Baroness stood up and said, well, we've just had a poll and 62% of people want to rejoin the EU. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, we had a 2016 referendum, which was 17.2 million people voted to leave. Then we had the European election, which re-elected members of the European Parliament, which was never our intention. But a party started off the day the European election was called. But within 4 weeks, it had built up sufficient funds and membership that we ran a massive campaign and we returned the largest single party in the European Parliament. That was a second referendum that the people had, and they said, no, we meant leave. And then obviously there was the election when Boris was elected, because Theresa May just was quite happy to capitulate and sign whatever the European Union wanted. And I mean, as Nigel Farage said, that deal that she presented was the sort of thing you'd sign if you just lost a war and they were holding a gun to your head. And that third referendum was the election of Boris. And again, the people said, absolutely, get out of the EU. How many times do we have to tell you? Now, a couple of years down the line, there's a baroness saying, well, we had a poll the other day. I mean, it's pathetic.
But I think their strategy is, if we can blame everything that goes wrong in the country the last couple of years, if we can blame it all on Brexit, and going forward, we blame it all on Brexit, and if the people believe our lies, then it wouldn't surprise me if there's a call for another referendum, because if you can convince the people all the problems are down to Brexit, why wouldn't people want to join the EU again?
Well, I think there's a simple answer to that, and that is to answer it with exactly what the situation is if we rejoin. The reality is that we rejoin, we have to go to the banks every week.
It'll be horrendous, yeah.
Borrow 350 million quid, hand it over to them, and then they'll give us a bit of money back that we'll have to spend on shutting down our farms and moving it. And the reality is that when you say that to people, that they immediately understand that we should be trying to become self-sufficient in food, because if you control the food, you can control everything then. And I mean, we had the same problem during World War II. We had people planting vegetables in allotments. We had people digging up flower beds and putting vegetables in their gardens, using bits of scrubland on the side of the street.
Because Hitler's strategy was to starve us into surrender.
Yeah.
And it nearly worked.
And it nearly worked, exactly. And similarly with energy, I mean, we've got 2 trillion quid's worth of gas under our feet. We've got this huge national debt, and one of the things we can do to get rid of it is to pipe that gas to whoever wants to buy it and use that revenue to develop our nuclear program and our hydrogen fuel cell program, which will mean that we can meet those 2030 emission targets. In fact, we can exceed them. We can be emissions free. Because, I mean, although vehicles are not a large part of carbon emissions, they're about 1%. The other 90 odd percent is industry and homes. But with the nuclear power plants, you can be emissions free.
Yeah, and I think I'd also use the analogy, if you're almost bankrupt, but in your loft is a Rembrandt that you don't like, well, you need to sell it and pay your debts off. And that's what shale gas is to us. It's a Rembrandt in the loft that we've got, and we need to start selling it because we need the money. We need to clear our debts.
And the other thing is the technology has been developed. I mean, we've been fracking for 50 years, but the technology has been developed now, which is far kinder to the environment. These technical drills that they can use that will go horizontal, all this sort of thing.
But these eco-terrorists don't care. We could create technology for fracking, and we could prove it's 100% carbon free. They don't care. Just like they don't care about nuclear, which is carbon free. They don't care. This is an ideology, and it's all about control, and it's like a messiah complex. I'm going to save the world. Aren't I amazing? Without me, we're all going to die. And if you stop me, well, and I'm saving the world, then I can probably kill you, because one life isn't worth 7 billion. So therefore, and I think they're going to start turning violent very soon. These eco-terrorists are pushing and pushing and pushing, and it's only a matter of time.
Most of them are vegans, so bring it on.
Yeah. The middle class, the vegans. It looked like if they got wet, you could blow them over. So, John, you are obviously now part of Reform, because I couldn't help notice the big banner behind you. I seem to think, was that my banner?
No, this is actually a photograph.
Oh, right.
This is actually a digital background. I mean, I could quickly go into settings and give you the beach.
Right.
If you remember from a long time ago.
Yeah. Right. So I remember having a banner like that I remember sending back to you. So,
I mean, I've actually got a new banner now, which is "Make Britain Great Again" with Union Jacks on it, which I have at the Battle of Ideas, and it's in my front porch at the moment. I've got to get it in a smart car and take it to Buxton.
So I think let's have a chat about Reform. Obviously, I know quite a bit about Reform, and other people know of Reform. But what they may not know about is your 8 key principles. And I didn't know about. Obviously, they're fairly new. I read them last week, and the first one jumped. I mean, I liked them all. The first one jumped out at me straight away, because I've been saying this for quite a long time. And the first one is, the state is our servant, not our master. We vote these politicians in to serve us, to serve our will, to make the country better, to do what we need them to do. They're not there to tell us what to do. There's a big difference.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the 8 principles came about because one of our members, who's a trainer by profession, actually, got in touch with us, and he's been a big help to the police and crime group. And so I got together with the police and crime spokesman, Neil McCabe, and we had a little meeting with this guy, Chris Farmer, and we put together this idea, and we then went and presented it to the chief exec, Paul Oakden. He had a chat with Richard, and they gave us the nod to develop it, meet up on Zooms and develop it and develop it and develop it. And so we came up with the 8 principles, and the first one is the one that really sort of leads on to our new doorstep slogan, which is work in progress, which is lend us your power and we'll give you back your freedom.
Nice. I like it.
When I came up with that, which they were all a bit astonished by, really, because they think of me as some sort of autistic nutcase that sits in the corner. But I do things. I get on with stuff. So that sort of first one is the thing that underpins the whole thing. And there are a couple of other things in there.
Give us another couple of examples of these 8 principles.
People are free. Certain freedoms, rights, and liberties should always be guaranteed, regardless of circumstances. Governments must demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt when limiting freedoms that it is conducive to the common good. Freedom of speech, faith, expression, and conscience should always be guaranteed. Now, obviously, with freedom of speech, freedom of expression comes consequences. You know better than anybody that is the case. But nevertheless, they are indomitable rights which we should demand. So that's really the second one.
How I see that second one there, how I explain that to people is, in this country, we're born free men and free women. At birth, we have all those rights of freedom. We then have a conversation with government about which one of those rights needs slightly curtailing for the benefit of society. So government do not give us our rights. We have them automatically at birth. But we then negotiate which ones need, taking down a little bit, or which ones need never to be touched. And that's a conversation we have with government, not government telling us which ones they're going to reduce or which ones we can have. It doesn't work like that.
Just going back to that particular thing that you've just said, our laws in this country since Magna Carta have always been, you can do whatever you want to do, so long as there's no law to stop you. If you look at the EU, it's the other way around. You're not allowed to do anything unless the law specifically says you can.
Unless the E tell you can.
Exactly. And that's one of the main reasons, the main thrusts of a reason why it will never, ever work. The culture of this country is still that we believe that we are free to do whatever we want as long as there's no law against it. And obviously, most people's values are such, as long as I'm not doing anybody any harm with what I do. But moving on, the other one that is absolutely of great importance for me is national sovereignty. And the government should protect at all times our institutions, democratic processes, culture, and national discourse from undue foreign or corporate influence. And I think that, there's a lot of people around nowadays who are conspiracy theorists who are saying that, Bill Gates tells Boris to ring Nick Buckley and upset him. And of course, that's all complete nonsense. All of that is explained very easily by a complete lack of competence by the civil service. But there are, nevertheless, lots of unelected non-government organizations, sometimes headed up and funded by wealthy individuals, sometimes, funded by members and managed by elected officials. And things like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth I mean, they exist. I mean, certainly I remember getting a copy of the Friends of the Earth manifesto for Yorkshire. Now, why Friends of the Earth, that isn't a political party, would have a manifesto, I don't know. But when I read it, it was essentially an anti-car rant that was trying to prevent any investment at all in Yorkshire. Now, you know, times move on, things change. You have to keep moving with the times. I mean, at the moment, the biggest complaint we get from potential candidates for reform is that they've put themselves forward because locally there's massive new developments of housing and industrial buildings, and no development of infrastructure, no public transport, no new roads. You know, so we've got this. I mean, the 40-year war on the car is coming to a head. People are beginning to realise. I mean, they're now starting to talk about driving tests for older drivers. I mean, I met Stirling Moss when he was 80. And believe you me, he would absolutely murder anybody outside, even at 80 years old. It's not like older drivers are having loads of accidents. There's nothing to drive that, and yet there's you know, there's still this thing, and it's all part of that number 8 principle of national sovereignty, where, you know, we are listening to unelected groups that are working.
Yeah, I can give you some other examples. So if you want to know external groups who are not elected that heavily influence our country, let's look at big tech. Let's look at Google. Let's look at Twitter. Let's look at Facebook. And they have a huge influence in our country by telling us what news we can watch and what news we can't watch, who can talk, who can't talk, what you can say and what you can't say. And then have a look at some of the charities and NGOs. Let's look at Stonewall. Who voted Stonewall in? Nobody. But they've infiltrated every level of government. I
was at the Battle of Ideas last weekend in London, and there was a group called the LGB
Alliance.
Yeah. There was no TQ++ in there, and they've pulled away from Stonewall. They've created a new pressure group, I guess. And I mean, what a decent bunch of, you know, reasonable people who are clearly quite frightened, actually, by the fact that Stonewall are grouping them together with another group of people that they don't necessarily want to associate with.
Yep, but again, Stonewall now have infiltrated every level of government, every institution, and have brainwashed basically all these government officers, all these institutions in their way of thinking, which their way of thinking may be right. I think it's wrong, but it may be right. But that's not the point. The point is, who voted these people to have such power and have such a say in our lives? Nobody voted them in.
Well, I mean, when I sort of start getting into discussions about transport, people immediately sort of jump on the public transport bandwagon. You know, and I say, hey, when did we have a referendum where the people voted to get rid of the car? I mean, let's face it, nothing more convenient than a car. You walk out of your house, you get into it, and you drive to where you want to go, park it, and you go into your work, do whatever you're doing.
Making cars affordable from the 50s and, well, it's more like 60s and 70s, liberated the working class. It gave them freedom. It made them able to take better jobs further away because they could drive there. It improved their lives.
It also, Nick, made it possible for Margaret Thatcher to achieve what she achieved, because when I used to run a training centre in Crewe, and Crewe's a very funny place. I mean, you still have a situation now when that whistle goes at 5 o'clock, the workers all get on their push bikes and cycle home because they all live within a quarter of a mile of where their workplace is. But obviously, Margaret Thatcher closed a lot of those workplaces. It was only the motor car that allowed her to do that. Otherwise, she'd have had a stagnant, unemployed workforce if they'd not been able to get in the car and go work somewhere else. Sorry about that.
There's always one who never turns his phone off.
And you know who it is?
Who?
Trevor Jones.
Yeah, good old Trevor was a guest on the podcast last
I
week.
know.
So for
I
people
saw
who
it.
don't know who Trevor Jones is, check out his interview with me about Bolton for Change,
Yeah.
which is really good. So I mean, let's get back to the point. So you're right. It's all the reason why I like that last point you raised. It's all about democracy, and democracy isn't about making us necessarily richer, or it's about keeping us free. That's what democracy is about. I would rather be happy and free than unhappy and richer. Money itself doesn't make you happy. Having, and again, when we say the country is getting richer, it doesn't mean that's spread evenly across the whole society. We've been leaving people behind for decades, and that's why we need more democracy, not less democracy. And again, that's what reform stands for. So if you're tired of the big parties and you don't know who to vote for, I would recommend you check out Reform UK. And if you like what they stand for and what they say, then you should be voting for them. They're a great party. I think that's
They are a great party, and also, I mean, we have a great leader. I mean, I was working all last weekend in London, and I absolutely didn't expect this, but obviously Richard came up to see our little stand and the leaflets we were dishing out and that, and he was very appreciative because he was speaking at the event. And about 10:30 at night, I got a text saying, "Hi John, thanks for all your efforts this weekend. Did you get home safe?" So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have got that off Nigel. He has that personal touch. When you're out on the doorstep with him, people warm to him straight away because he's a really nice man.
I've met him lots of times. I've been on his radio show, on Talk TV. Richard Tice is a nice guy, and he's in this for the right reasons. The conversations I've had with him, he's not a fly by night. He's not in it to make money. He doesn't need the money. He's in this for the right reasons, and he wants the country to get better.
And I think that our latest "Make Britain Great Again," together with things like lend us your power and we'll give you back your freedom. Those sorts of things are ringing bells with people. I mean, there are an awful lot of people who are politically homeless, and I mean, we're not going to win the next general election, but if we can get a few MPs at the next general election, that will shake our establishment to its foundations. And obviously, I think the other thing we might then get, and I'm betting that the farm on it, that we'll get PR, which will mean that, sure, we'll get 20 or 30 Green MPs, but we'll get 70 or 80 Reform ones too.
Yeah. I'm not sure we'll get that many Green MPs. I think the Green Party has always been a protest vote. And I think if we get PR and they come under the spotlight and there's other smaller parties out there who are saying what the people want, I'm not sure the Greens will do as well as they think they will, because the Greens are really dangerous. I wrote an article on them last year. They're basically eco-communists. They want to take us back to the Stone Age. They're very dangerous. They just don't get the spotlight shone on them because they're a small party.
Exactly. I mean, the thing is, of course, that their policies are all about, even if you produce a piece of technology that says we can maintain the status quo and be emission free, they go, "Oh, I'm not sure about that," because it doesn't fulfill their agenda of us sitting with bits of rug over us with a stone axe chipping away there. But we need them. We need them so that we know what not to do.
Yeah. Now that we've criticised the Green Party, I think that's a great point to end. I always love criticising the Greens.
Okay, well, I don't know how much trouble I'll get into for that. But I suppose it depends on how big your viewing is.
It's not that big at the moment. I'm hoping it's going to grow over the next 6 months. But as you know, you've got to start small.
Sure. How many did you get? How many did you get listening to it at the moment?
An average podcast now gets 200 or 300. My most successful one is hitting about 900, 1,000.
Who was that?
That was with one of the presenters of the Lotus Eaters, Callum Derar. He's got a big following himself, so when he shared it, that that, you know, a lot of his
Right.
supporters
Yeah.
watched it. But people are watching it because I've got an email. I got an email yesterday of a project that's trying to bring back all the local counties.
Oh,
And
that would be Trevor. That.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
they contacted me because somebody in their group watched the interview I did with Trevor, and we talk about Bolton going back into Lancashire.
Well, funnily enough, Nick, Trevor's contacted me about them, and they've been in touch, and they want to meet Richard. They've invited him to the Oxford and Cambridge Club in London on Pall Mall.
Right, lovely.
And it's the sort of thing that Reform might pick up because, you know, it's about traditional English values, which is, you know, part of the culture that we're trying to preserve. I mean, obviously, you know, that's not, we don't want the racist label. I mean, we welcome all comers. I mean, goodness knows, you know, my family were Irish, and I mean, as I say to our black brethren, you know, when they start complaining, listen, at least you were above the dogs, you know, because it said used to say no blacks, no dogs, and no Irish on the, but they, you know, they don't seem to, you know, they seem to appreciate that this whole island is massive immigration, or always has been.
It hasn't always has been, and
Yeah, my mate Subert, he comes. His family came from France. You know, there's loads of my family are, you know, loads of Irish over here. We're a mongrel nation.
every nation to a certain extent is a mongrel nation because they do interbreed, and we've always had that. But no, that's a great point to stop.
Okay.
Cheers for coming on, John,
All right,
and
mate.
I'll speak to you soon.